We're standing on the edge of something big, and we're gonna make some changes. We're gonna make some changes.
Hi, I'm pleased to announce something very special to me, a new subscription-based service through NextAct Advisors that allows members exclusive access to personal industry insights and bespoke corporate governance knowledge. This comes in the form of blogs, personal book recommendations, and early access to the Founders Sandbox podcast episodes before they release to the public. If you want more white glove information on building your startup with information like what was in today's episode, sign up at the link in the show notes to enjoy being a special member of NextAct Advisors. As a thank you to Founders Sandbox listeners, you can use code SANDBOX25 at checkout to enjoy 25% off your membership costs. Thank you. So welcome back to the Founders Sandbox. I am Brenda McCabe, your host, and this monthly podcast. And we're now in our third season, and my podcast, the Founders Sandbox, reaches entrepreneurs, business owners with guests, and these guests teach us about building resilient, scalable, and purpose-driven enterprises, all with great corporate governance. My mission is simple with this podcast, is I really want to assist through my content and my guests, those entrepreneurs and business owners in building those scalable, well-governed, and resilient businesses. And I like to have in my guest corporate directors, primarily to speak about their own experience sitting on corporate boards and building with great corporate governance. I like to think that we can use the power of the private enterprise, be it small, medium, or large, to create change for a better world. And we do some bit of storytelling in a fictitious sandbox on the founders or the corporate directors' origin story. I am absolutely delighted that this month I have Dr. Keith Dorsey as my guest. So welcome, Keith.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you so much. And while you check many boxes, you're joining today because you have authored a book. It has a launch date of May 6th, 2025, so just around the corner. And the title of your book is The Boardroom Journey Practical Guidance for Women to Secure a Seat at the Table. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
For, wow, you're a busy person, and we'll get to that later. You know, where did you find the time and the courage to publish a book, launch it in today's environment? And we'll get to those questions later. So for my guest, Dr. Keith Dorsey and I go back many years, actually prior to you being a doctor, right? You check many boxes as a guest. You are a seasoned board member, executive advisor, informal coach, and researcher. I love that. And it was in preparing your doctoral dissertation that you discovered that, I'm going to quote here, I was reading a compelling study on the effects of gender diversity on corporate governance. And you basically repurposed your original dissertation to provide actionable guidance on increasing boardroom diversity. And when you switched your dissertation, that topic that you had to defend, otherwise you wouldn't be a doctor today, right? was the idea for the book that is launching on May 6th. So again, welcome to the podcast and thank you for joining me.
Right.
So we chose, as all my guests know, we chose a title because I, at NextAct Advisors, am about building purpose-driven companies. The title that Keith and I came up with is, Bridging Gaps for Better Governance. So Keith,
yes,
share with us kind of your origin story. Go back all the way, although I'm going to encourage my listeners to purchase your book, but go back to your origin story. You nailed it in like one page in the book, but tell us where your origins and what was your, not only your boardroom journey, but your journey to where are today. Thank you.
I often tell people, Brenda, that this is my third chapter. The first chapter was the U.S. military. I actually enlisted in the military and between my junior year of high school that summer and my senior year of high school. I knew before I started my first day of my senior year of high school when I was leaving for basic training in the Air Force. And so my first chapter was the Air Force for a number of years. I was stationed in Florida, the Republic of Panama, and the United Kingdom for a number of years. And then I got impatient and decided I wanted to get out. I had a successful early career in the Air Force. And I said, if I can be this successful in the U.S. Air Force, which is like a large corporation, imagine what I can do in an actual corporation. And I set out on this journey to explore sales. And that led me to my second chapter, which was corporate America. And I worked for almost 30 years in corporate America, primarily as a turnaround specialist in the area of sales. I would take over the toughest sales organizations within these large companies and really lift the hood up and figure out, were they having a people, product, or process problem within the organization, and then begin to tweak the areas. And I worked for two large companies, a Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 for almost 17 years, and then a Fortune 500 for almost 12 years. And I was just a strategic growth expert. I would turn around teams, and I would also start teams within the organization to come up with ways for double-digit growth and oftentimes triple-digit growth. And so that's what I did for almost 30 years. And then in January of 2019, I entered my third chapter, which was supposed to be semi-retirement in this portfolio career. And unfortunately, I failed miserably at retirement. And what I've been doing for the past 6 years in this, almost 7 years in this portfolio environment is executive advisory work.
Okay.
Also started serving on boards, in which today I serve on 5 boards, 2 private, 1 municipality, 1 university, and 1 nonprofit. And then I decided to go back to school to get my doctorate. And so I went back to school at the University of Southern California and pursued my doctorate in organizational change and leadership. And all my research was in the, at this point, at that point, all my research was in the lack of gender and ethnic diversity on corporate boards. And so,
Right. So, and that's fascinating that you chose your doctoral kind of dissertation and focus around organizational strategy, right?
yes.
Was that based at all on your 30 years of sales strategy? Were there any analogs, I wonder?
There was, part of what I would do whenever I would take over a situation that required me to turn it around, like I said before, was to really look at the organization, to look at many components of the organization, people, product, processes, look at artifacts that are going on, the subcultures, the cultures. And so I've always been fascinated about it. And I did things innately, and I wanted to learn the science behind many of the things that I innately did. And after really diving into research and studies around organizational change and leadership, I wish I would have known many of those things that I figured out the science behind back when I was an actual executive doing it. But nevertheless, by learning it now and using that in my governance roles, I still have the opportunity to put the science and behind what I'm doing as a board member. And I tell people, whether it's as a board member or my researcher or my writing roles that I have today, that I'm bilingual. I speak business and I speak academia.
Yeah. And boardroom lingo, right? which combines a bit of the two. I like how you use the word science. You know, we were chatting, before actually getting on air today. We've known each other primarily because we're both members of the National Association of Corporate Directors, right? And I've been a member since, I don't know, 2016. I don't know how long you've been a member, but your book is truly a kind of a North Star. I wish I would have had it when I began my board journey. I actually started my board journey while in Europe, and I got onto public board and I went, holy cow, I better get trained. And went to the local equivalent of the NACD in Spain called Instituto de Consejeros Administradores, ICA. So for my listeners, I do want to do a shout out. If you are intentional and want to learn more about what the journey is to getting on a first or subsequent boards, the book that Keith has authored is launching on the 6th. And there is a third section, and specifically it's around your capital that you need to kind of package. It's called Commitment Capital. It's trademarked. We're going to get into that, but it's truly unique because I've read a lot of board books over my 12, 13 years, and I have not seen anything as unique as this. So shout out to you.
Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to also, ask you, what made you decide to turn that dissertation into a book? What was because writing a book is not for the faint of heart. So
It was not on my bucket list.
So what happened? This is kind of inspirational for me. What made you go, all right, I've got to get a book out there?
Well, this has been a serendipitous journey. Just even going to get my doctorate was something that I kind of stumbled into. I was dealing with a tiny bit of imposter syndrome, and in dealing with that, I assigned something to myself to get rid of my imposter syndrome. And I said, it's hard to get into a doctorate program. I just want to see if I can even get in. And so in Keith Dorsey fashion, I probably went a little overboard, and I applied to 7 different universities and 8 different doctoral programs. And what I didn't realize in filling out all those applications, which was crazy, was that I needed a lot of former executives that I worked with, other CEOs and, like I said, other executives to serve as a reference for me. So I collected 15 people that I would use for all those applications, 2 or 3 at a time. And they wrote, I guess, great things about me because I got into all 7 universities, all 8 programs, but I really just wanted to boost my ego. I didn't really want to go back to get my doctorate. I needed to solve for my little bit of imposter syndrome that I was dealing with. But what I didn't account for were 15 accountability partners saying, which one are you getting in? Which one are you going to choose? I wrote you a great reference. I hope you choose the one that I wrote the reference for. And I said, oh no, now what? I got to get in.
Now I really have to do it.
I have to get my doctorate. So I really didn't have a strong enough why to do this to begin with. But what made me, once I got in and I chose this problem of practice, which was my second problem of practice. My first was around shareholder primacy on corporate boards. And I stumbled into this problem of practice, which was around the lack of gender and ethnic diversity on corporate boards. But I ended up going down this path of corporate board diversity. And I just told you this wonderful story and forgot your question.
What made you decide to publish a book? Right?
And so as I was
natural segue.
Yeah, and as I was going through this program and beginning all this research, and I really got into my research, probably a little too much. And I was sitting with my dissertation chair, And she said, Keith, there's something you need to know. I said, what's that? She said, a good dissertation is a done dissertation. And my friend, you have way too much research out there and you've written so much, you have to narrow your focus. And I said, give me some examples. She said, pick an industry, pick an ethnicity group, pick a gender, do something. You have to narrow this down. And I really pushed back a lot. And one of the sayings at the University of Southern California in this program, Organizational Change and Leadership Doctoral Program, was trust the process. And so she said, Keith, I know you're pushing back. I know you believe in all this research you uncover, but you have to trust the process. You have to narrow it down. I said, okay. If I narrow it down, what do I do with all this research over here and all this research over there? She said, write a book. And that's how I ended up getting to this point where I actually wrote a book with all this rich research before my dissertation. And then I successfully completed my dissertation. I had all this information, and I did something most people wouldn't do. Immediately after getting my doctorate, I dove into more research studies.
You're kidding.
Up interviewed formally and informally hundreds of women directors who have made that career shift into corporate, into being an independent director. And I got so much rich, even more information on their barriers, their enablers, their career, and how they were able to make that shift and successfully get on corporate boards. And many of these women have been on boards for decades.
Right.
And that's how I ended up where I am today with this rich data.
And I would ask you to describe the 4 characters that are in your book and their names and where were they in the career, right? So
I'm happy to share. I wanted to take a unique approach. Many books out there and many board readiness programs out there that will share a lot of theory with you, a lot of information that is rich that we need to know. If you're going to be a student of your profession, as you mentioned before, I highly recommend everyone interested in being a board director to go to some sort of board readiness organization and get your education. And then get your certification if you can as well. And so in really diving into all the women that have successfully made this transition and the hundreds of interviews, informal and both formal interviews that I conducted, I started to see themes in their career at certain ages and certain sections of their careers. And I took a lot of that data and I created these 4 fictitious women that I would use and talk about as a part of a case study and examples so that when you read a chapter and all this theory and all this information, you could then listen to how they took the information from that chapter and executed on it. And so the 4 women that I created, the first one is Lauren. She's 25 and she's a brand new manager in a corporation. She's actually been with the corporation for 3 years as a sales executive and got promoted into her very first sales management position, entry-level sales management position. That's Lauren. Then I have Denise, who is a brand new senior manager in a firm. And then I have Michelle, and Denise is 40 and a brand new senior manager. And then I have Michelle, who's a 55-year-old executive in a Fortune 500 corporation. And she has said that she wants to retire in the next 3 to 5 years. And then lastly, I have Sharon, who is a 62-year-old CEO of her family business. And she's the second generation of the family business. She's been the CEO for the past 12 years, and she's going to turn the business over to her much younger brother, and who will take over as the CEO. All 4 women said at some point they're going to want to serve on a private or a public corporate board. So what should the 25, 40-year-old, 55-year-old, and 62-year-old do in these at this point of their career to best prepare themselves for board service? How should a 25-year-old really execute her career? And instead of taking, like many of us have done, a promotion for the sake of a promotion because they want me and because it pays more, instead of just doing that, but really looking at beginning with the end in mind. I ultimately want to be an independent director. So how should I orchestrate my career? How should the 40-year-old make a few more tweaks before she is at that level where she wants to serve as an independent director? And then this person who is actually thinking about retiring in the next 3 to 5 years, what tweaks should she make over the next 3 to 5 years to be most attractive and most prepared and known in the industry to be an independent director? And lastly, someone who has served on her own board as an executive director and CEO for the past 12 years, but never has been an independent director. What are the things she should be doing right before she turns the business over to really show up perfectly as an independent director versus an executive director moving forward?
Thank you. While the characters are women, and the book is, has a tagline, what is that again? That was the
Guidance.
That guidance for women to secure a seat at the table. By no means is this a book that solely can be read by women. I think it speaks to the other gender. And what I found really unique is that you had characters at different times and moments, inflection moments, and their careers and how to really be intentional.
Yes.
What my favorite chapter, I will tell you, is chapter 3. Why? Find your why. That's the name of the chapter.
Yes.
And it is in alignment with the work I do with business owners and founders. It's like, what is your North Star? Oftentimes they created the business, they're purpose driven, but articulating the why, why did you go out and, work these hours and put your, remortgage your house to build this business? Finding that chapter, find your why. And in probably the research you did with the over 100 interviews, you ideated this, but I'd love for you to share, because I think it's very important. Of all your chapters, this is, for me, I think if I were an aspiring director, independent director, this would be the one that most resonates with me. Find your why. Tell me a bit more about that chapter, Keith.
And it did for me, Brenda, as well, for 2 reasons. One, because of the research that I uncovered and the qualitative interviews that I conducted. I found out that those that were successful at making that transition from being an executive or a high-powered government official to actually being a board member, they did find their why. And I also, in this chapter, this 3rd chapter that I'm in, I became a managing partner and a practice leader of CEO and board services at a global executive search firm. And I would have meetings with many executives who will actually say, Keith, I want to serve on corporate boards. And I would ask them why, and they really couldn't answer. And I would ask them specific questions about what type of board, private or public. And they would say, Keith, I don't care. Just get me on a paid board. And that's not going to work, and it doesn't work. And so I dedicated a whole chapter to finding your why, because as aspiring board members or board members seeking their 2nd or 3rd board, and they kind of found their first board because someone tapped them on the shoulders and said, we want you, but they don't know how to replicate getting on their next board because no one's tapping them on their shoulders right now. I found that by getting people to reflect on, number 1, what brings them joy?
What brings them joy?
What brings them joy in this world? Life's too short. And when you're interviewing for a board role, When you're interviewing for something that brings you joy versus the person who is equally as qualified is interviewing against you for that role, when you show up for something that brings you joy, you light up the room. And that energy, that person interviewing you picks up on it, and you end up having this banter, and they understand that, this seems to be more important to this person versus that executive. You all are exceptional executives. Your CVs are outstanding, but sometimes just the fact that you're interviewing for something that brings you joy could be the differentiator. The other thing is the reflect on your why, and when you are successful, understanding why you're successful. When you do fail and you feel miserable, understanding why you failed and why you felt miserable. And by spending that time reflecting on that, you'll begin to figure out your secret sauce. You'll begin to figure out your superpowers. You'll begin to figure out the value that you actually bring to organizations, because you uncover when you are successful, why you're successful, and when you fail, why you fail, and when you feel miserable, why you feel miserable. Most people don't take the time to reflect. And then as executives, we have conducted many of these vision, mission, and value exercises for our companies. We've led them, we've written them, and we've done all these things for our companies. But how often do we actually bring that home and transfer those skills to figure out our own personal vision, mission, and values? And when you take the time to do that in this find your why period of time, you can begin to figure that out and run every single situation through those funnels. And that will help you really find your sweet spot. And then you're only interviewing in areas where you can truly bring value. And so that's why I wrote this section.
Wow. It sounds like a lot of work. All right. So your book, I think, is it's a guidebook. So again, we have the 4 characters. You can pick up the book and read chapters. They don't need to be read from, in sequential order. Talk to me, I think it was really unique about commitment capital. There are 5 types you've identified. And I've never read or thought of a concept like this when kind of packaging my board credentials or others. Speak to me about the commitment capital.
If you don't mind, Brenda, I'll touch briefly on the other 4, and then I'll spend more time on commitment capital. But the 2 capitals that you typically hear about when you go through any board readiness program, as one is human capital, and that talks about your education, your expertise, your experience throughout your career. That's the human capital side of things. And then we talk often about the social capital. That's your network, the people and boards are interested in your human capital and your social capital. The social capital side, they want your contacts, they want your connections, they want your help with the M&A and finding funding and different things like that, finding the right talent. Your social capital is a big part of it, and your social capital can help you get on a board as well. But those are the 2 that you often hear about. The other 3 that I wrote about, one is director capital. You don't hear much about that one, and that's similar to human capital. All these skills that you accumulated in education, you accumulated throughout your career that helped you along your career. Director capital is more narrow, and what are the experiences and education, like board readiness training, that you need specifically to become a director? And so that's director capital. Then I dove into cultural capital, which you don't hear much about. And cultural capital really looks at from back when you were 5 years old in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and the experiences and the people you were surrounded by that you mirrored, you emulated, and the obstacles that you innately had to overcome back in those early years that you called upon either innately or on purpose, intentionally throughout your career to get you through some rough times through your education period and through your career. People that can call back and understand their cultural capital can use that to get on boards. That's cultural capital. And then the fifth capital was the missing link. And that's about commitment, the ability to do the things you need to do in order to get something done and call upon that. And I can give you an example.
Yes, please.
I have two different groups of women and directors and executives that have very similar outstanding CVs. And they all have gone through a board readiness program, and they all have completed some sort of certification. This group found their way on corporate boards. This group have been really trying to get on boards for up to 5 years to no avail. But when you look at them on paper, education, experience, and success-wise, they look similar. And the missing ingredient that I found via research was those who got on boards did something differently than those who didn't. And the majority of the ones who haven't found their way on boards, when they completed their programs, they were proud of themselves. They took copious notes and throughout the program, and they said, done. Let those board positions begin to come my direction. And those who actually ended up getting on boards, who also took copious notes, they were studious throughout the process, but then they went back home and they executed. They started to make trade-offs in their lives, and they started to do things differently. Some of them gave up TV on Wednesday nights, and they no longer watch the 3 Chicago shows. They traded that in so that they could begin to do things differently and find the time to do that reflection work and find the time to network differently and find the time. And so they started to hold themselves accountable via their commitment capital to get things done. To this date, I still have people that will say, Keith, I want to get on a private or a public board. And I will look at their background and I say, you know what you really need right now? You really need to serve on a nonprofit board to get some human capital experience while surrounding yourself with some incredible social capital that will see you in action. And they say, Keith, I don't have time for a nonprofit board. Now, the NACD says the average board member, independent director, spends 250 hours a year on each board. And you're telling me you want me to help you find a private or a public board, and you don't have time to serve on a nonprofit. Let me tell you, you don't have time to be on a for-profit board, and you need to find your commitment capital to make the necessary trade-offs so you do have the times to dot your I's and cross your T's. That's what commitment capital is all about. And that was the missing ingredient.
I love it. So you coin it the missing link. The analog with business owners and founders is grit.
Yes.
Grit.
Yes.
Right? Not
Absolutely.
to steal your thunder, but I get it. So I encourage those that are aspiring for their first or subsequent board positions to take a look at that. Now, I'm going to ask a question that potentially has in the current climate, and again, this is April of 2025, there's been a lot of backlash in our current administration to remove anything with the acronym DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, remove it from position hiring, anything that actually is receiving federal funding. I'm curious, you also have in your book coined a term called optimal diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And while I think you had this term in all the research, right, in your original writing of this book, could optimal diversity be that analog to the downfall of DEI?
I think so. And unfortunately, what's going on in today's society, mostly in the US, but even several other places in the world, is that organizations, in my opinion, and have confused the confused. And they are saying we need to move away from diversity and move towards meritocracy. And that we need to get away from checking a box and move to bringing merit back. And the unfortunate part is diversity, equity, and inclusion has always had merit as the prerequisite.
Yeah.
It's never been about checking a box and just bringing in an unqualified individual so that we can look from an observable diversity standpoint differently. It's really been about one, the prerequisite and the table stakes is merit.
Yeah.
And then two, to be able to fish in different ponds, to bring in different people. So ultimately, we can have that cognitive diversity or diversity of thought brought into the room. And unfortunately, because of this reason for bringing parity and make certain that your boards and your C-suites and your companies resembled the stakeholders that you were going after for all obvious reasons. Unfortunately, the message has gotten lost as to why we want to do this. And it's really about mitigating risk, disruption, or finding blue oceans. And you mitigate your risk by having a representation of that diversity of thought to protect your business and to understand all the stakeholders that you're trying to serve. But the prerequisite was always merit. And so I share with people that meritocracy and diversity truly can and do coexist.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so optimal diversity is the combination of observable or demographic diversity coupled with diversity of thought is optimal diversity. And that applies to every human being when they begin to reflect and to peel back their cultural, human, social, all those capitals I mentioned before.
Yes.
They can begin to present themselves in such a way that they can demonstrate their optimal diversity. As a managing partner and a practice leader, a CEO and board services, I will spend time with executives one-on-one from all walks of life and coach them. And I remember when I typically would sit down with a white male executive during this period of time, and I would tell them my story and what my background was on and my research around my doctorate. They will start off because they're now interviewing with a search professional that can help them get on boards. And they would start the interview off like this. And then as I begin to tell them my background and my research, they would end up like this and angry. And then I would talk to them about optimal diversity and they would start to loosen up. And then they go right back to this. And I remember in one of my conversations with a Fortune 500 executive, a white male, and I talked to him about optimal diversity. And he said, wait a second. He said, Keith, I grew up on a farm and I went to this sort of school. And he jumped out of the camera like that. And he said, I do bring diversity to the table. And I said, yes, you do. He said, but I've never had to present myself that way before. And what you just did was you taught me to reach into myself and figure out how I differentiate myself from any other type of executive. And I never had to do that before. And that's optimal diversity.
Absolutely. So if you heard it here on the Founders Sandbox, optional diversity refers to ensuring that observable demographic diversity is coupled with diversity of thought. And meritocracy and diversity are not opposing aims, but instead are symbiotic and share a common goal. So thank you, Keith, for developing the concept of optimal diversity, and a must read book coming out on May 6th. I would like you to have your time on air to provide my listeners with how they may contact you, because not only are you launching your book on May 6th, the Boardroom Journey, I do believe you have one-on-one coaching, as well as you do speaking opportunities. So Keith, how's it best to contact you?
Well, you can find me on my website, which is boardroomjourney.com.
Okay.
And my email is keith@boardroomjourney.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn under Dr. Keith D. Dorsey. And so those are, several different ways you can find me. And when you go to boardroomjourney.com, I'm really attacking this approach of making certain that we take board governance very seriously and helping equip individuals at various stages of their career to be best prepared for board service. I want everyone, as I mentioned before, to go through some sort of board readiness program with the many different type of board readiness programs out there. But then once you've done that, I focus on 3 areas. One is with, I'm sorry, Brenda, you want to ask me a question?
No, it's okay. One
is with the boards themselves. I'm going to challenge via our consulting offerings, challenge boards to really take a look at their board members they have today. And really, many boards will have skill matrices.
Yes.
And so they will look at the skills matrix and maybe highlight 12 different functional skills. And then they want to outline their board members and how they rate in those different skills. And then they stop there. And I consider the skills matrix to be the top 10% of an iceberg.
Okay.
And that's the part you can see. The bottom 90% below the surface is around their competencies. And in our consulting, I challenge boards to actually measure the competencies of their board members as well. And those are the things below the surface, their behavioral traits and things like that, because you want to have the right mix of independent directors on your board. And then look at where they have a redundancy of experiences in their functional areas, skill sets, as well as competencies, and think about their strategy moving forward and where do they have gaps. And so that's one half of what Boardroom Journey does. The other part is with individuals. And what I have uncovered is that many people will go through a program, but they don't execute, as I mentioned before.
Right.
Commitment capital. So one of the offerings we have is you get an accountability partner. And with the accountability side of things, the accountability partner will meet up with you and have 30-minute one-on-ones with you, almost unlimited one-on-ones throughout the year. The number is so high, but you cannot get the next meeting with your accountability partner until you have proven you've done the things that we talked about in the prior meeting. And so that's an offering. And then the other offering is 6 months of one-on-one coaching, 2 times for 1 hour, each time twice a month. And that one-on-one coaching is taking a lot of the principles and action items from the book, The Boardroom Journey. And instead of doing it in an asynchronous sort of fashion, we're going through it together one-on-one to make certain that you begin to do the things differently to get different results. The saying is, successful people do what unsuccessful people don't do. And the goal there with the one-on-one coaching is to have you do the things that you need to do in order to get to where you would like to go. And so that's what the Boardroom Journey as a company and a practice actually does for individuals.
Thank you for sharing that. This will be in the show notes, Keith. And I'm very excited to provide some exposure, and my listeners, particularly those that are considering your own boardroom journey. I'm going to switch gears back to the Founders Sandbox. I I'm passionate about, resilience, purpose-driven, and scalable growth. And I love to do a round robin with my guests on what does that meaning of resilience mean to you? Each of my guests has a different
Yeah.
definition. So
For
please.
me, resilience comes down to when you truly have a true north and you believe in your true north, having the intestinal fortitude to do things that you need to do in order to get it done, and not giving up right when you're at that point where things can actually turn around. That's to me what resilience is about. But you first got to know your true north, to have the intestinal fortitude and courage to stick with it until you hit it.
Thank you. How about purpose-driven? The title of your episode is Purpose, right?
Yes.
Bridging gaps for better governance. But beyond that, what is purpose-driven? What has made you be so purposeful?
That's a great question, Brenda. I would have to say, right back to that true north, finding your why and really spending the time to think about where are there unmet needs
Okay.
in the marketplace. And, I've worked with some incredible organizations, and sometimes we are too insular and we come up with some great things that we created that we think the market should be interested in. And the market says, you know what, that was cute, but no. And so I feel when you start from the client's perspective and you uncover where there are unmet needs, then and only then can you truly be purposeful in meeting those unmet needs. And that feels good here, and you're solving something that's needed in the marketplace.
I get it. You heard it here. Keith Dorsey's definition of purposefulness. Scalable. So I think that what you have done here, by publishing what was originally your dissertation and then building a consulting and practice around is actually scalable. What's scalable for you?
Something that can have a process.
Okay, a process.
A repeatable process around it.
Mhm.
I've watched businesses succeed and then fail because they built something that was needed in the marketplace, but they allowed themselves to get off the beaten track because they're trying to be all things for everybody. And for me, when a business is truly scalable, they found something, they met an unmet need, and they know their sweet spot, and they stay in their sweet spot. Now, do they disrupt themselves to stay ahead on the bell-shaped curve? Absolutely. But they built something that has a repeatable process, and they can keep their margins down because they're not just being there for everybody. To me, that's what scalable is all about. Finding their sweet spot and executing.
Excellent. Fantastic. Last question. Did you have fun in the sandbox today, Keith?
I actually did. The problem here, Brenda, is I just enjoy having conversations with you. And so that we did that via podcast. We did what we normally do, but via podcast, that's excellent. So I had a blast. Thank you. And what about you?
I always have fun. I love the fact that my guests can tell their stories. They're very authentic. You're very authentic. You live your purpose. And actually, that's why my guests come to me, right? And say, this is, podcast right now are a growing channel. And I do have a large followership now. You can also follow me on YouTube. So to my guests, I hope you enjoyed this month's podcast. Actually, this month is I publish a lot about corporate governance, the month of April. So if you like this episode with Dr. Keith Dorsey, sign up for the monthly release of this podcast, the Founders Sandbox, where my guests are founders, business owners, corporate board directors, authors. And you'll learn about how to build strong governance, for resilient, scalable, and purpose-driven companies to make profits for good. So thank you for joining me again, Keith. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Signing off.